Some of the most dangerous diseases out there can build up for years, undetected, while your lab work looks completely normal. Heart disease, diabetes, fatty liver, they can progress undetected, kind of silently under the surface for a long time. And by the time we have a symptom or something looks obviously wrong in our blood work, it's been causing damage for ages. And the irony is we have tests that are widely available that can detect these early signs, but they're underutilized. Most doctors are not prescribing them routinely. So in today's video, we're covering 4 blood tests that can be game changers because they can detect hidden damage long before symptoms pop up. And in the end of the video, I want to touch on a test that everybody gets, but is often misinterpreted, misunderstood, even by doctors. Now, the problem with the routine lab work that everybody gets is it's focused on asking one question. Is this person, are you already sick? But we want to detect the problems earlier on so we can prevent disease, not manage disease once it's already set. For example, we've all gotten a fasting glucose at some point, a fasting blood sugar, and that's a useful test. But we can have insulin resistance causing damage for years way before the glucose ever goes up. That's because our body will work overtime to compensate for the insulin resistance and keep the glucose in the healthy range. And that's a good thing, but it hides the underlying problem from us if we're only relying on that glucose reading. Insulin resistance can precede type 2 diabetes by 10, 15 years. Some people never become type 2 diabetics. They just remain insulin resistant. And insulin resistance causes damage to your blood vessels, to your nerves, to your liver, to your kidneys before glucose ever goes up. So you don't want to have that completely undetected. The most validated way to measure insulin resistance in the clinical setting is called HOMA-IR. There are other ways that are harder, like more invasive, way more of a hassle, that are used in the lab, in studies. For the regular person getting some blood work, HOMA-IR is the best bet. Now, HOMA-IR is actually not one test. It requires 2 different values, your fasting glucose and your fasting insulin. But most people already know their fasting glucose. Once you have these 2 values, it's a very simple formula, and there's a number of calculators online, free to use, that you can just plug your values in and gives you your HOMA-IR value. So I'll link some of those in the description. Just make sure you have the units right, whether it's milligrams per deciliter or millimoles per liter, matches the website. Otherwise, it won't make any sense. So HOMA-IR reference range is under 1, ideal, optimal. Over 1.5 starts to be borderline, over 2 starts to be insulin resistance, and then the higher the worse. So if it's over 3, it's frank insulin resistance, and on and on. Another problem with the fasting glucose is that it's just one measurement, it's just one point in time. So if you're sick, if you didn't sleep well, if something's off with the test, you can get a weird value that is not representative of most of your days. A better test is the hemoglobin A1C, or glycated hemoglobin. It reflects glucose levels, so if it's abnormal, it's a more advanced problem than what the HOMA-IR shows. And the hemoglobin A1C looks at an average of your glucose over the previous 3 months. So it's like measuring your glucose thousands of times and then averaging them all together. And it gets over that day-to-day noise. Another advantage of the hemoglobin A1C is it doesn't require you to be fasted. So it's an easier test to get. You can get it anytime. Hemoglobin A1C really is the quintessential measurement of silent damage because it measures how much your glucose has been attaching to your red blood cells and damaging them. And high hemoglobin A1C is bad news for your blood vessels, for your kidneys, for your nerves, for your retina. Reference range, a normal hemoglobin A1C is under 5.7%, but this isn't black and white, right? So there's a little bit of a continuous effect. If, for example, your hemoglobin A1C goes from 5.1%, which is completely normal and healthy, but slowly over the years it's creeping up to 5.3, 5.5, 5.6, that's a red flag. Okay, the third test I recommend everyone get at least once in their life is Lp(a). Lp(a) is a lipoprotein. It's a particle that floats around in our blood. And Lp(a) is overwhelmingly determined by genetics. So if you measure it once and it's completely normal, you're good. And it's surprisingly common. About 1 in 5 people have high Lp(a). In some ethnicities, it's even higher. In African Americans, it's 1 in 3. So a surprising number of people are walking around with high levels of this and are completely unaware. And this is a problem because people with higher Lp(a) have higher risk of heart disease and stroke. These particles are not just proatherogenic, which means they contribute to plaque in the arteries, atherosclerosis. They're also pro-inflammatory and prothrombotic, which means they cause coagulation. So they're nasty little buggers. Because it's genetic, it runs in families. High Lp(a) is a common feature of unexplained heart attacks, sometimes at an early age. So someone will have a family history where an uncle had a widowmaker at 40 or even younger sometimes, or grandfather had a stroke pretty young, and they didn't have a lot of risk factors. They weren't obese, they didn't smoke, they didn't have diabetes. It wasn't something obvious. And you start digging and there's sky-high Lpa. There's different ways to measure this in the lab. The best test measures in nanomoles per liter. So it measures the actual number of these particles floating around in our blood, and the normal value is under 75. Also, because it runs in families, once someone has a high value, we do what's called cascade screening. So you start screening family members, and you often find a parent, siblings, descendants who also have it high. So this is really a striking test because it can change the health landscape, not just for you, but your entire family. And it's crazy. A lot of people have never heard of Lp(a). Many doctors even are not quite sure what it is. Now, unfortunately, healthy lifestyle by itself is not going to normalize your Lp(a) if it's very high. There are some therapies that are being tested. Right now, what we do for someone who has it high is we're more aggressive at controlling other risk factors so that we lower overall risk of heart disease. Okay, on to the fourth test. Like we said, Lp(a) is a type of lipoprotein, a type of these particles in the blood. And there's other types of these particles that also cause heart disease. And there is one test that measures all of them. If I could only get one test for heart disease, this is the test I would get. And it's called ApoB, and it counts the number of total lipoproteins in your blood that cause heart disease. Normal ApoB is a little subjective. In healthy individuals, we like to see it under 80 milligrams per deciliter. If you have high risk, if you have diabetes, or if you have a lot of plaque or something like that, if you've had a heart attack previously, then we like to see it under even more strict thresholds. Now, here's a good question. If ApoB measures all of these lipoproteins, why do we even need to measure Lp(a), right? Why bother? Just get the ApoB and measure all of them. The reason is that in most people, Lp(a) is a small fraction of the ApoB particles, so it can get diluted. Some people can have an ApoB that looks fine, but then their Lp(a)s are high. So, and because they're so nasty, you want to know. So ideally, you want to know both numbers. And I know circumstances vary. Some people can't measure blood work with ease. So if you can't get an ApoB reading, there are ways around it. You can calculate, for example, with your basic lipid panel, take your total cholesterol minus HDL cholesterol. You want that under 130, ideally under 100 milligrams per deciliter. And that's a pretty good surrogate of ApoB if you can't get the measurement. There's other ways to estimate, to calculate your ApoB as well based on your basic lipid panel. We have a whole video on that, and I'll link it in the description. All right, before we wrap up, let's talk about a test that is commonly ordered, but is often misunderstood. Almost everybody has gotten their LDL cholesterol measured at some point, and there's a lot of debates and a lot of hoopla and a lot of confusion about LDL on the internet, and that's because LDL cholesterol is a very iffy, very imperfect test. Some people have a total cholesterol that looks perfectly fine and an LDL that looks perfectly fine, and their doctor often looks at that and goes, your LDL number is good, go forth and be happy. But a lot of these people are laying down plaque silently, and it's going to cause problems down the line. Those tests we talked about, the ApoB, the Lp(a), are much more specific to the actual root of the problems. A lot of people have high ApoB or high Lp(a) or high both, and they can have LDLs that look perfectly normal. That's especially common among people with diabetes, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance can cause that as well, or just people that are overweight or obese, which is so common in our society, is almost the norm now in the West. So they have the risk factors for heart disease. They can be laying down plaque in real time. The tests are there, but if we're just going by the LDL, we miss a lot of those people. So LDL is not useless. A high LDL, a very high LDL, is a big red flag, but it's incomplete. You want to dig deeper. A lot of you guys tell me that your doctor refused to ask for an ApoB, or some of you even tell me your doctor didn't know what ApoB was. That is a problem because heart disease is the #1 cause of death in humans worldwide. So if your doctor's not sure what ApoB is, or Lp(a) for that matter, please send them the link to this video or a number of other videos where we talk about this and we go over all of the studies. If you measure your home IR and the result comes out that you have insulin resistance, good news, most people can reverse that with healthy lifestyle. You just need to know how. We covered exactly how to do that in this previous video right here. So check it out and I'll meet you in there.